Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for May 23rd, 2018. On today's episode, we'll discuss the latest film and TV news and get a reaction for Arrested Development Season 5, which is coming to Netflix. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast are Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
We will get to the Arrested Development Season 5 review later in this podcast, but before that, let's get into the news, and let's start off with news that about the John Wick director's next project. Chris, what do we know?
Yes, Chad... I'm so
Stahelski?
Stahelski, I think?
Sure, Chad Stahelski. Let's say that.
By the way, it's also very confusing whenever we say the director of John Wick, because there was two directors of John Wick.
Right, well, Chad Stahelski was the accredited director, but everyone knows that he and David Leitch co-directed the film, and then David Leitch basically went off to do his own thing. He just directed Deadpool 2, and he did Atomic Blonde. Anyway, so Chad Stahelski, again, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, he's sticking with Lionsgate, who also made John Wick, to make another action film. It's called Analog, and it's an adaptation of the Image Comics comic series. And it's set in the not too distant future when internet privacy is basically a complete thing of the past, which isn't that far-fetched considering where we are right now. And there's a lengthy synopsis, but it involves, what you can expect from this director, where there's going to be a bunch of stylish shootouts and stuff like that. It sounds very interesting. I haven't read the comic, but Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall has, and he tells me it's very good and it has a very strong sense of world building. So it's a neat little sci-fi premise, and in this director's hands, it'll no doubt be a very stylish action film. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the art for the series if you just Google it, it looks very cinematic. I have also not read this comic. I do love a lot of what Image Comics does. A website I often go to, when I'm looking into what comics I'm going to buy on Comixology, is a site called Comic Book Roundup, which is kind of like the Rotten Tomatoes of the comic book world. The average critic rating for this series is 7.3, which isn't too high, so I'm not sure if it's that great, but it seems like Jacob likes the world building, which I don't know. I mean, like, these John Wick guys, what they have done with the John Wick universe, let's give them some world building. I'm excited for it. And now let's get into a bit of theme park news. Last night, Disney Parks announced when we can expect to enter a galaxy far, far away. They revealed that Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in California's Disneyland would be open in summer of 2019, while the Hollywood Studios version in Walt Disney World would be opening in fall of that year, so a little bit later. But the news that I really want to talk about is a new rumor that Universal Studios might be planning a Star Trek land to compete against Disney World's Galaxy's Edge. Ben, what is going on here?
Yeah, so Disney and More reports a rumor that Universal Studios might actually be working on a full entire Star Trek land that could be a part of their upcoming fourth theme park. So a few years ago, Universal acquired and bought up a ton of land around the convention center in Orlando, Florida, and they haven't officially announced that they're opening a new park yet, but it seems like that is definitely what they're going to be doing. We've actually talked on this podcast before about some of the rumors about different options that they could have. There's been some rumors that they might have a Lord of the Rings section, maybe even a Jurassic World section. But now the rumor that we've actually sort of been hearing some rumblings about from our own sources as well is that an entire Star Trek land might be part of this new park once it eventually launches. So we don't know anything about like what would actually be there in terms of attractions or anything like that, but there actually was a Star Trek ride, or not really a ride, more of like an interactive stage show called Star Trek Adventure that was at Universal Studios from the late 80s to the mid 90s. So even though the movie rights for Star Trek are controlled by Paramount and the TV rights to the show belong to CBS, Star Trek actually has had some relationship with Universal Studios theme parks in the past. So yeah, it's kind of a fascinating thing. If this happens, it would definitely be seen as a way for Universal Studios to directly compete with the other big sci-fi franchise in Star Wars across town. And Universal and Disney are constantly sort of going head to head in terms of theme parks and one-upping each other. And Star Trek and Star Wars is a time-honored geek debate about which franchise is better. So it all seems to sort of fit in well thematically there. Peter, what do you think about this? Do you think a Star Trek land is something that people would pay to go visit in person?
I don't know. Like, I do know that, obviously Star Trek had a big fan base from the 60s to 70s. Or the recent movies that J.J. Abrams started out. I think there was a healthy fan base returning to the franchise there as well, but they've kind of waited. There's been too many years in between each of these installments, and Star Trek Discovery hasn't gotten the best of reception from fans or critics. I'm just wondering, are there enough people excited to go into the world of Star Trek? And I guess, that leads me to pose the question to Chris. Chris, which would you rather jump into, the galaxy of Star Wars or the world of Star Trek?
I'm sure Star Trek fans will yell at me for this, but when I picture Star Trek, I always picture it in like a confined space. Like it's always like on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. It's always like indoors. Whereas when I picture Star Wars, I picture, all those landscapes and, out in space, all that stuff. Like, I don't know, that's just when I picture the iconography of those two things, Star Wars stands out as the more open world. So I can see that more clearly as a theme park than I can Star Trek. Now, again, I'm sure someone will very politely tell me I'm wrong, but that's how I see it.
And there's also, I guess I should mention that there were some plans in Las Vegas for a company to build a full-size replica of the Starship Enterprise in the 1990s. And it would have sort of taken some attention away from the Las Vegas Strip and moved that, because the replica of the Enterprise would have been in downtown Las Vegas. So it would have been a way to sort of divert some tourists over to that part of town. The whole thing ended up never happening, but some concept art made its way online a few years ago. And it's really, sort of spectacular to behold, like the idea of an entire Starship Enterprise just plopped down in the middle of a city like that. So maybe they could do something similar. I have no idea. This is all 100% speculation on my part. But if they were to do something like this, maybe they could do something like that for Universal Studios, like drop a full-size Enterprise in as the theme park and then have different areas of the ship be different rides and attractions and stuff like that. And that way it could sort of keep that enclosed space that you're talking about, Chris, but also serve the function of being like a self-contained park in and of itself. Peter, what do you think about that?
Well, it's weird because the Enterprise does not land on land in the series. So I'm wondering if Universal would stick that stringent to the theming of the world we see in the movies and TV shows, but that there aren't many worlds in Star Trek that I would like to visit, but I would like to be on the Enterprise, and I think that would be cool, walking around this huge starship and being able to be on that bridge and be part of, we have this article today, from one of our freelancers, Vanessa, who, is comparing, there's this like VR experience for Star Trek, which is incredible. And basically you each get to be a member on the bridge of the Enterprise, and you have to work together to like, complete the goals of the mission and stuff like that. I think that would be incredibly cool to do, in an actual Enterprise. But now that they already have a VR version, which you can download on your home consoles, and, essentially have goggles on and see your friend from across the bridge, I'm not sure if like there is even a point to do this, in reality. It's sad that I'm saying that, but yeah, I don't know what a Star Trek ride would be other than to, be piloting the Enterprise in some way. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what comes of this. I kind of, as much as it sounds like this might actually be happening, I kind of love the rumor of them building Lord of the Rings land in this new Universal theme park, which, Ben, I know you're a big fan of that franchise. Which would you rather, Star Trek or Lord of the Rings?
I would definitely prefer the Lord of the Rings, but I feel like if Universal has this whole new, if they're going to be opening an entire new park, maybe they have enough room to do both. I don't know. That would be kind of a cool thing, because having Lord of the Rings and Star Trek, those are two of the biggest names in fantasy and science fiction. So that would be a pretty good way for them to compete with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, because as we know, that's like a hugely immersive experience, and everybody is going to be talking about that for a long time. And I'm sure people at Universal, the executives and the theme park people, are eyeing that very nervously right now. So anything they could do to compete is probably pretty high on their priority list. And the double whammy of Lord of the Rings and Star Trek might be exactly what they're looking for. I don't know.
And more Harry Potter, because they already have 2 Harry Potter lands. They need a third. But let's move on from theme park news to some casting. We've been talking about all the people joining It Chapter 2. Chris, you have an update for us.
Yes, so an actor named Jay Ryan is the latest addition to the cast. He's playing the adult Ben, the character played by Jeremy Ray Taylor in the 2017 film It. And
who is that, Chris? Who is this guy?
No offense to Mr. Jay Ryan, who I have no doubt is a nice person and a fine actor, but I have no idea who the hell this is. And this casting has disappointed me ever so slightly, because up until now, the casting for this movie has been fantastic. Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, Bill Hader, James Ransone, all these people, they're either really well-known actors or actors you at least recognize from stuff. And I don't know this guy. He was on the CW version of Beauty and the Beast, which I guess they had a series based on that. He's appeared on a show called... God, what's it called? I don't even know. Oh, Mary Kills People. I don't know what that is. And he's also appeared on Top of the Lake, which I've heard of, and I've seen the first season of that, but I don't remember who he played. So he's not exactly someone who stands out for me. And so, I have a lot invested in this movie, because I love Stephen King. I loved the 2017 It, and I'm very excited for this film.
And there have been a lot of people, including ourselves, who have been doing fantasy casting for this movie in this role. Who would have been your top choice?
See, I don't even know. HT, our own HT, pointed out that this actor looks like a bargain basement Carl Urban, and when I heard that, I was like, man, I just wish they had cast Carl Urban in that, because that would have been amazing. But there's a part of me that's like, I wish they had cast literally anyone else for this part. But to be fair...
But again, you don't remember this actor. No. So you don't... See, I guess that means he's it's not memorable enough. But, yeah, I don't know. We should give him a chance.
Right, like, I was going to say, like, to be fair, everyone in the 2017 It was pretty much an unknown. Other than like Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things, I didn't know who any of those actors were, and they all did a great job. So to be fair, just because I don't know who the hell this guy is doesn't mean it's I'm gonna write the movie off. And I'm hopeful he delivers a great performance. As long as his performance is good, I'll be happy. But there will always be a part of me that wishes they had added someone a little more well known. And now there's only one part left, and I'm very curious to see who that'll be. That's the character of Mike. He's the last remaining member of the Losers Club that they have to cast.
I also watched the first season of Top of the Lake, and I do not remember this guy at all. But one thing about Jay Ryan is he actually does really look like a slimmed down older version of the kid who played young Ben in the movie. So based on looks alone, he's a good choice. I just hope, like you, that his performance bears that out as well.
Yes. Yesterday on the podcast, we talked about Damon Lindelof's Watchmen HBO series, which is not a sequel, not an adaptation, but kind of like a follow-up in some way. a remix, I think is the words he used. Today we get a bit of casting for the series. Chris, who is joining the show?
A lot of people. So Regina King, Don Johnson, Tim Blake Nelson, Louis Gossett Jr., Adelaide Clemens, and Andrew Howard, have all been announced to join the cast. And this is an interesting lineup. I mean, Regina King was on The Leftovers, which is Damon Lindelof's other show. Don Johnson is a very well-known actor. Tim Blake Nelson is a great character actor. And I don't know, it's a very interesting lineup. The only thing is we have no idea who they're playing because, like you said, Peter, this isn't a straight adaptation of the comic. It's more like a sequel where it's set decades after the comic. So everyone who died in the comic is still dead. So it's hard to really even guess who they're playing. And Damon Lindelof has said there's going to be a lot of new characters in the show. So for all we know, all these people are playing brand new characters we've never heard of before.
I do like the choices in this casting. There's a lot of like kind of cool character actor kind of choices. Don Johnson, who is probably most famous for Miami Vice. Has kind of been on a comeback with didn't Tarantino cast him in something? Or he was in Django.
Yeah.
Choices like that are interesting choices that you wouldn't typically see, I think, from HBO casting. So I'm interested. Ben, do you have any thoughts on this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine who these characters are going to be because it sounds like Lindelof is doing something so totally different than just a straight adaptation that it's like almost impossible to know. But I think in the story it says that Regina King is like the primary person in this cast, like the lead of the show. So that's an interesting thing. And I was talking a little bit yesterday about the idea of from behind the scenes, Lindelof, surrounding himself with a bunch of different people who are not straight white guys to write this modern sort of update of the show. And the idea that they're having a black woman lead the show is totally different from what they did in the comics and should maybe provide, some sort of a different lens through which to view this Watchmen world. So, it's an interesting choice for sure.
And, it should be mentioned that Tim Blake Nelson, who has been involved in 2 Marvel projects, he was in Fantastic Four and The Incredible Hulk, has now turned to the dark side. He's now entering the world of, I guess it's not DC Comics, is it? They're owned by Watchmen. The series is owned by DC. I think the sequel is kind of like trying to bring it into that kind of DC multiverse. But I don't think it's actually in the same world as, Batman and Superman. But yeah, anyways, he's jumping from Marvel to DC Vertigo, whatever you want to call it. But let's move on to our last bit of casting news. But this is for movies. This is casting for the Men in Black spin-off, sequel, legacy equal, whatever you want to call it. Ben, what is going on?
Yes, Liam Neeson has been cast in the new Men in Black spin-off sequel thing, whatever you want to call this thing. We don't know exactly what the movie is going to be about, but we know that it is not going to feature Agents J and K, who are played by Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. We know that Iron Man writers Matt Holloway and Art Markham are going to be writing the film, and Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson are going to be starring in it. We know that Liam Neeson's character is going to be the head of the Men in Black organization in London, which is where this story is supposed to sort of kick off. So Rip Torn, the guy who played the lead of the Men in Black agency in the first film, is 87 years old now. I just looked him up just now as we were talking, and I guess that means he's a little bit too old to do this, but the idea of Liam Neeson coming into this world seems like a pretty great fit. Again, we don't know exactly what his take on this character is going to be, but the idea of him, playing like a Tommy Lee Jones or Rip Torn type character where he's like this, curmudgeonly old man, is pretty appealing. I think it's a good fit, and he has like pretty good comedic timing too. I'm thinking of like Liam Neeson's role in the Lego Movie. I thought he did an exceptional job there in terms of voice performance and having really great timing as like this good cop, bad cop character. So him playing an authority figure in the Men in Black universe is pretty appealing to me. Chris, Peter, what do you guys think about this?
I mean, I don't think I really care for any more Men in Black, but I mean, I had fun with the original movie. I actually like the third film quite a bit, the time travel fun of that. But I don't know. I just
Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson don't do it for you, Peter?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I before all this casting, I would have probably been in the same boat where I'm like, I don't care about a new Men in Black. But this casting is great. I mean, Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth are great together, as Thor Ragnarok proved. And I'm excited to see Liam Neeson do a comedy again, not again, but just for a change, because he primarily sticks to dramatic or like tough guy roles. And as Ben said, he does actually have a really good comedic timing. There was this show on HBO called Extras, which the show was just so, but he had a guest part on that show playing himself, and he was actually really, really funny in just playing this, comedic version of himself. So I'm very interested to see him do a comedy for a change.
You mentioned the age of Rip Torn, and this has nothing to do with anything. I've been talking a lot about Cobra Kai recently on the podcast, but this is something I wanted to bring up because when I came to this, it was kind of shocking to me that Ralph Macchio. How old do you think Ralph Macchio is, Chris?
50 maybe, or like 48, somewhere around that line. I don't know.
Ben?
Yeah, I was going to say 47. That was just a guess.
He's 56 years old, which is shocking in a couple aspects because, like, I know that movie came out in 1984 and he was supposed to be in high school then, but, like, growing up in the 80s, like, you kind of, like, associated yourself with him. Like, so, I don't know, I felt like he was more my age range, so that's kind of shocking. But the other shocking thing is Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi, in the original movie was 51 when that movie was shot. And I'm not sure if you've seen what Ralph Macchio looks like in Cobra Kai, but, like, he does not look as old as Pat Morita looked as Mr. Miyagi. I don't know. Anyways, I'm sorry to
derail. I feel like people always looked way older when we were kids too. Like Christopher Lloyd wasn't that old when he starred in Back to the Future, right?
I actually don't even know his age, but, like, yeah, you are right. He has looked like he has been, in his 60s forever. And that has not been the case. But let's get to our last bit of news, and that is some box office tracking for Solo, A Star Wars Story. We were all unsure at the beginning of the summer of where Solo, A Star Wars Story would, how well it would do. We've had Rogue One, we've had experience with the Star Wars anthology series film, but this one was plagued with more problems than that one even. And when we were doing our summer movie wagers, I feel like people were unsure if this could be number 2 or number 3 or number 4 or number 5. It was all over the map. So now we finally are, the movie's coming out. We finally get a little bit of info. We see some tracking for the film. Chris, how well is Solo going to do?
It's going to do very well. The early domestic tracking is going to be somewhere between 135 million to 170 million, with overseas projected at 150 million to 170 million. And if this happens, and it probably will, this will be the first $100 million plus Memorial Day weekend since 2014, when X-Men Days of Future Past opened. And the current Memorial Day weekend record holder is another Disney film. It's Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which took in 139.8 million. So it looks like Solo is actually going to beat that record and become the, as of now, all-time Memorial Day weekend box office champ, which seems to be par for the course. It doesn't look like Star Wars will ever slow down at this point at the box office.
Yeah, and I think people are probably wondering how this compares to the Star Wars franchise in general. This number does not beat the recent saga films, but if it does 170 million, that would be more than Rogue One, which is surprising because I thought there was a lot more buzz for that film than there was this film, especially considering not all the critics have liked Solo, but we'll have to see how well it does and what general audiences think. I actually think And I'm wondering what you guys think of this, but I actually think that general audiences are going to respond better to this movie than critics have. Both of you have seen the movie. What do you think of that statement?
Chris, what about you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I didn't love Solo. I liked it, but it's a very easy to digest film because there's really nothing going on in this movie. It's just a series of action scenes, and they're fun. They're fun scenes. It's an entertaining film. The cast is likable. Everyone's having a good time, but there's no real story. It's literally just a series of big set pieces, and I do think the general public, not to sell them short, but they're gonna really eat that up because it's a holiday weekend. People just want to kick back and be entertained, and they're going to get that from this film.
Ben, do people just want to be in the air conditioning and have fun? Is that the sad truth?
I mean, I think that kind of is the sad truth, especially with the Star Wars franchise. It seems like that's really, people want familiarity. I know that we, as people who appreciate creative risks, are always railing against Disney's choices to, feed people a meal that they've had a million times before with just slightly new packaging on it. But that's sort of what happens here in this movie. And I mean, as much as as much as I would prefer them to take huge swings, I do think that this movie is fine and good enough. And I guess that's, with these tracking numbers, it seems like good enough is going to be, good for a record-breaking success for Star Wars for a long time.
Okay, we are done with the news. Let's get into our feature presentation, which is just to get basically Chris's reaction to Arrested Development Season 5. You wrote a whole review on the site. We don't want to give spoilers. We don't want to say anything that people wouldn't want to hear that have not seen this show. But I want to get a sense of what you thought of. Actually, what did you think of the series thus far before we get into this actual season?
The first 3 seasons that originally ran on Fox are fantastic. There's some of my favorite episodes of TV, especially as far as comedy goes. That original run was just hilarious and clever and just really well written, and I loved it. And I was, of course, upset when it got canceled, and I was happy when it got saved by Netflix. And then Netflix released the quote unquote 4th season, which was a bit of a shock.
It was not received well from fans or critics.
What had happened was, when Arrested Development started, the cast wasn't exactly they weren't stars. Jason Bateman was really the biggest name at the time, and he hadn't really been a star since the 80s. That was his comeback vehicle. And then after Arrested Development, all their career, I guess David Cross actually was a name too, but for the most part they were on the fringes, and that show blew up their careers. And so by the time it was time to do season 4, they were all very busy with doing movies and other shows, and it was hard to get them all to come back to shoot scenes together. So to compensate, the season 4 did this really weird sort of thing where instead of having the ensemble together again, which was really the strength of the show, watching all these actors act off each other, it broke them all up into their own individual episodes. So there was one episode focused primarily on Jason Bateman's character, one episode on David Cross's character, and so on and so on. And it really didn't work because, as I said, one of the things that made the show so great was watching these actors bounce off each other, and that season 4 just wasn't doing that.
Okay, so coming off of that, you must have liked season 5 more than that, right?
Season 5 is slightly better, but to me, this is a sign that it's time. It's really time for the show to just hang it up. There's not really much more to do with the show. So, before season 5 started, a lot of the cast was saying, it's going to be a lot more like the old Arrested Development. It's going to be a lot, a lot more scenes where we're going to be together again. Like Will Arnett said, there's a lot more scenes where the main cast is back together again. And that's sort of true. You do get a lot more of that, at least than in season 4 here, but it's still abundantly clear that a lot of people are just way too busy. Like Tony Hale, who plays the character Buster, must have been just really busy shooting, I guess, Veep, because he's on that show, because he has almost no scenes with anyone other than Jason Bateman. I've only seen the first 5 episodes, so maybe eventually he gets back together again. But just based on watching that, it's like, oh, they're still doing the same thing where they can't get everyone together again. And even beyond that, the jokes just aren't as funny, and everyone seems really tired and bored. Like, it just seems like no one wants to be doing this anymore, and they're just contractually obligated to keep coming back and play these characters. The only one who sounds like he's having a good time is Ron Howard as the narrator, who is probably like the funniest part of the show. Ron Howard continues to just sound like he's having a really great time, probably because he gets all his work done in like one afternoon. He probably comes in and reads it all and then leaves, whereas everyone else has to keep, playing these characters again and again, and they just don't seem to be enjoying it. And it just made me a little sad just watching season 5. I was just like, I wish they would just stop. Like, I want this to be the end. There's really nothing else you can do with the show.
That's sad. And it's also kind of funny that, if I had told you, Chris, if I had gotten into my DeLorean time machine and came to you, went 5 years back into the past and came to you and been like, Chris, 5 years in the future, there will be a new season of Arrested Development that you will recommend less than a new Star Wars movie directed by Ron Howard. Would you have believed me?
No, and it's very strange because, like I said, when Netflix saved the show, I was thrilled, and that was sort of like the beginning of that era where everyone was like, "Oh, I hope Netflix starts saving other shows," and people are still doing that today. Where anytime something gets canceled, someone immediately is like, "Oh, I hope Netflix saves them." But it's it's kind of ironic that the show is called Arrested Development because it can't really. It's like the audience can't move on. It's like, just let it go. Let the show die at this point. It's okay. I know people don't want to hear this, but it's okay to let things end. I know people want things to just keep going on and on forever because they feel safe and secure in that, but it's okay to let things end sometimes. It's all right. Just let it go, please.
Then on the other side of the spectrum, there's things like Roseanne, which are monster hits and, have returned after how many years of, being away. I don't know. It often makes me think too, like, you have this huge fan base of Joss Whedon and, those, Firefly fans who keep on demanding that show, come back together for one more season. Like, I feel like everybody would be so disappointed by whatever that would be. Maybe it was great that, the Beatles broke up when they did. Do you know what I mean? And didn't turn into, what the Rolling Stones are today. Maybe it's good to have an end, as Chris was saying. Ben, where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me writing every day at slashfilm.com. You can track me down on Twitter at Ben Pears.
Chris, where can we find you?
Also slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
You can find me at slashfilm. You can find all the stories we talked about today in the show notes and on slashfilm.com. This podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your emails at peter@slashfilm.com, and please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.